hello again to some of you. We're here for the last talk. For those of you who are coming now, Gary, I'm the Cross Family Curator here at the New Museum. And this is our second to last talk of a very exciting day. And I think this is one of the most anticipated talks of the day with two of artists who have done amazing shows here at the New Museum this year. First is Kaari Upson, whose show was on the third floor amongst our focus shows this year in the spring. And before that was a full museum show of Raymond Pettibon called A Pen of All Work, which was, both of which were huge successes. And we're also very excited to have them in conversation. I don't think you guys have spoken before.
I've met Raymond once. It's so funny. Your show was right before mine. Yeah, that's right, because I had to deal with the wall build out, as
yes, exactly.
This is how big the artwork could get through the door.
Yeah. So I think we have, you two, although you don't know each other very well, I think there's a lot you have in common. Both of you, native Southern Californians, and I think growing up at different times, but also, I think, at least for me, both of your work deals with ideas about America and American culture through a very sort of personal lens, and the kinds of culture you digested at different moments in time. But also, I think with both of your exhibitions, drawing played a big role, especially in the first room for you, Kaari. So maybe just as a starting point, why don't we start with Kaari, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the drawings you had in the exhibition. I think those are really interesting for me when I saw them, because I also thought about Ray's work and sort of the way that Ray organizes ideas, his system of filing. And Margot and I were talking earlier today about your drawings and how they are sort of collections of ideas that then diverge off into other paths. And they're sort of a way of thinking for you that I think is really interesting. So do you want to talk about a little bit about what drawing means to you, maybe?
I don't know what you mean by filing in terms of Raymond's work. But it's funny because when this lecture was proposed to me, I was thinking, other than the fact that drawing is primary to my work, drawing and video are equal. The drawing part is actually the most joyous part of probably my practice, and then the video making is always really difficult. But drawing is the thing that grounds me, and I don't think any of my work, I think all of my other work is a byproduct of my drawing. But as this was proposed to me, I thought about Raymond a lot in terms of when I first saw his work at the Helter Skelter show. I was only 19, and I've said this before, it's not interesting, but it was the first museum show I'd ever seen in my life. Raymond's work kind of struck me in a very funny way, and I'll talk about that later, but when I think about our work, I actually think about our differences more than how much we have in common. Maybe that comes around to it having more in common through its differences. When I was growing up in Southern California, I was a part of, I didn't look at art. I was a part of the whole skateboard, surfing, scene, whatever the fuck scene that was, but as a total bystander. All my boyfriends were skateboarders, and my whole position was sitting there with my knees to my chest and watching them physically do these things. There was I don't even remember because it's so long ago, but there was a famous place to surf down, I think it's Trestles or South Trestle Beach, but I'd be picked up at 4 a.m. and we would drive down to Orange County, because I'm from San Bernardino and we're total outsiders, and you'd walk along a path that had a lot of drawing and text on it, but you didn't even see that because it was dark and it was 4 a.m. And then you'd wake up on the beach and you'd be surrounded by naked surfing guys putting on their wetsuit. And my whole experience of Southern California in these kind of active things were always as a witness to it. So to get around to a few ideas of it, I look at Raymond's practice sometimes as so direct, and the ink that can't be erased it's so physical to me and immediate, whereas some of my drawings take 7 years. I'm not always the only person who draws on them, because like a 5B pencil filling in, text for 3 weeks would just exhaust my wrist. So I also am not the only person who draws on my drawings. So I started to really think about what it was like to be a part of the Southern California scene. Baseball, my dad was almost taken in for the Oakland A's as a left-handed pitcher. Like my whole life was like this thing, but for some reason I was just like right outside of it. And I don't know if that relates to the drawings.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it absolutely does. I like to think about, surfing as, a starting point for drawing in some way, because I know obviously Raymond's surf drawings are really fantastic, but one of my favorite things in the show we did was showing some of the childhood drawings that you made that you've gone back to since. In particular, some of the surfing ones and some images of, warplanes and, in terms of, what do you think about when you look at some of those drawings from the very beginning, from when you're a kid? Does it, do you still think about drawing the same way? The subjects, in many cases have continued, although maybe the narrative and the language around them has changed. What was the experience like to look back at the first drawings?
Well, I was fortunate that my mother saved them, so that's rather uncommon. And at one time I was working with my nephew and niece as well, and trying to put myself back into the psychology of a young kid, and however successful if that's at all possible. And that I have a son who's going to be 6 in January, and I've been working a lot with him. And
he's also a very talented draftsman already, Bo. I think we've.
He's at a certain age where I don't know. I've always loved children's drawings, although they're really impossible to recreate, oneself. But it's a fortunate opportunity to work with a kid.
Yeah, and with some of those, it's been great to see them incorporated into some of your work as well. And a mural we did that we had in when the show traveled to Maastricht this summer had a great couple of drawings by Bo incorporated into that process. Kaari, have you saved? Do you have your first drawings from when you were a kid, or did your parents keep that material around? Or
yeah. So it's funny thinking about it, because my mom just recently, I don't know when there's a point where a parent decides that this isn't something that they're going to burden, but my mom gave me all of my drawings back. This is a tiny box, but I thought it was kind of premature in terms of they were all the Mother's Day cards and such, and notes I guess I wrote to my brother in like traumatic events to tell him that to calm down. It just happened about a year ago where all of a sudden this box was landed in my studio. I actually didn't take a deep look at it. But this idea of revisiting childhood seems to be coming back in work most recently. I think it's always been pointing to it, but I've been spending a great deal of time in my hometown. And I was telling Raymond behind stage that I've now been driving 4 days a week to this landlocked area in California called San Bernardino, and it's kind of a crazy feeling to come as a full-grown adult and revisit your child home. No parents, by the way, completely, like they're living in Idaho almost full-time. And the night before I flew here, was the first time I ever had a party in my parents' house. Whereas as a teenager, I would never, ever try to do that. But we had a kind of quiet, raging party of 8 people after casting Tree. And it was the most fun I've ever had in my life. But that's as close as I get to like revisiting my like imagery. I saw Raymond's, those drawings stood out to me more than anything in his show. That idea that you could even go back into an old piece of work. Like, I have work from 10 years ago that I want to revisit and alter because it sucks. That's not the case with those, I'm not saying, but there is this feeling of like, you're supposed to let it lie there as history, but like going back in my parents' house and actually having a party with drugs and drinking and like dancing on the deck where it was never allowed, like really reinvigorated like what the possibility, I don't even know if it's a possibility.
Yeah, well, I like that idea of revisiting too, because I think that was, you know, for us who got to work on Raymond's show, you know, looking back through a lot of the work, you know, thousands and thousands of drawings, and also, you know, looking at how certain images, you know, recur throughout and how things have changed, whether it's, you know, baseball players, like the kinds of stories you're able to tell or the kind of histories that you engaged with, you know, returning to certain motifs and iconography over time, but also, I think one of the special things about, you know, going to your studio, Ray, is how much material from throughout your career you're surrounded by, and how, you know, especially with the collages, you know, you're willing to kind of even, you know, cut up older pieces and kind of give them a new life and a kind of new narrative context. You know, do you remember when have you always sort of had that kind of lack of preciousness about older material, or, you know, when did you decide that you could actually kind of, you know, recycle and reuse it and kind of collage it in that way?
Well, I used to work on a drawing from beginning to end, and over time, I worked on drawings and with the idea of getting back to them, and you know, sometimes they'd be 20 years at the studio, and I mean, you're one of the few people who've seen my notes in any amount of detail, I think, and for every drawing I do, there's a voluminous number of notes and writings, and you know, enough to keep me busy for several lifetimes. And any particular drawing can, you know, at times they some of them were done over a period of time, and until there's no space left on the page, you know, to write on. So it's not entirely a new concept, you know, of narrative. It's
just waiting for a time to find its finish, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, I think that is, you know, this is what I was mentioning before with in terms of like, you know, filing. Like, Ray has an incredible system of files organized by topic with clippings from books and newspapers and, you know, all sorts of sources with, you know, special quotes that are kind of edited and annotated. And I think one of the remarkable things too is that, you know, these excised bits, you know, taken out of context, that you're still able to remember where they came from, and that that there is that catalog exists in your mind as well too, which I think is something that's very special. And that's kind of maybe what I was saying with with your drawings, that they have a kind of, there's this kind of accumulation and an exhaustiveness to, I think, a lot of the ways that you work as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting Raymond saying no space left. I think about that a lot with the drawings. I work really large scale. When a certain topic comes up, or a piece of an image, or even just a reading, I know exactly what drawing it goes to. Even if it's been sitting in my studio for a very long time, it'll feel very urgent or immediate that goes to, deliberated to a certain drawing. It could be frustrating because I have a studio at home, so I can't always I have a kid, so I draw at home at late night when she's asleep, and I can't always get to that drawing with a certain piece of text. Then I have to footnote it. I don't keep files, but I have deep amounts of post-image sourcing. I don't know how to say that. I don't rifle through things waiting for it to be plucked out. It comes either immediately or I don't know how to explain it, but I don't work through a file cabinet. It's recent, it's current, and then it goes deliberately toward a certain drawing. And it gets frustrating when the drawing's not in front of me, because the idea that I have to put it in my iPhone to note it the next day feels kind of dead. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think also thinking about your work, Kaari, for the catalog, Paul McCarthy did a really nice interview with, and Jim Shaw also wrote a nice piece. And I think as a younger artist from Los Angeles, and you talked about Helter Skelter as well, I think all of your works are very, very different. And I think, Ray, your work is different than Jim and Paul as well. But I think, the kind of the voluminousness of their works.
Voluminous?
Yeah,
the volume.
Or just the excessiveness, or not even the excessiveness, but the sheer volume of what they produce. How much were you influenced by that show in general? Even though I think your work, is so different than that particular generation. How much did that loom large for you? That do you think it's something endemic to California or LA?
Yeah. I was born and raised in Southern California. Were you born in Southern California?
Just as well, Tucson, but
Tucson's not. Yeah, I guess it's close. It's not.
Since I was 2 years old.
I think that show, I've mentioned it a couple times before, and then I almost feel like I over-mentioned it, because it probably was definitely the biggest dent in my aesthetic history, because I had never been to a museum before. I remember that show very particularly because my boyfriend, who studied at Long Beach State, was a painter. He was 5 years older than me, brought me there. We got in a big fight, and he left me there, and I had to figure out a way to get home. And it was a very weird moment in my life, because I feel like I kind of got forced into mulling around in that show longer than I wanted to. Raymond's work on the back wall, you were on that back wall of the Geffen, from what I remember, which was very industrious, space. I kind of had this attitude of I could fucking do this. I was completely the immediacy of it, and whatever the attitude was whatever. And then I found Mike, and then I found Paul. It was a big deal. I don't even know how I took all that in until later, and then realized how much that meant to me. At the time, it was just my boyfriend left me there. I was stuck there. And then the second time I ever saw a museum, I was 21 and went to the Spengel or something in Hanover in Germany, because my mom's from there, and then saw Daniel Richter's and the other guy. So it's like my main focus. I was painting since I was 16. I didn't know a lot, but those guys left a huge impression on me. I mean,
yeah,
that's it. Like, I don't know what else to say.
And Ray, for you, I think, obviously, your work developed independently. It's not like, Mike and Jim went to school together. But do you, I think you and Jim especially, because you're the two that I've worked most closely with. Jim also has this kind of collecting sensibility. Do you feel like, obviously you're dealing with books and literature. Do you feel like your work in that sense was shaped by California? Was that, do you think your work would be the same if you grew up in New York?
I mean, somewhat. It's inevitable. Your history and your geography is going to. I think there's too much emphasis placed on it, especially for Helter Skelter, which at the time got horrible reviews. And I remember Paul Schimmel sent me a stack of reviews in it, and they were all just about. A lot of it was about reviewing not just California, but Los Angeles especially, which Los Angeles is doesn't get the best press for many reasons, and probably deservedly so, considering it's a film capital of the world, but it became a very important seminal show, and eventually in Europe especially, and
did it travel?
No, but it influenced.
I think a lot of German artists came to see that show, as far as I remember. Yeah, I don't know why, but.
I mean, I'm not much of a surfer, but I've surfed trestles, and I was just saying that how much I like San Bernardino in that area.
That's such a strange thing to say. Trestles is the place where you walk down that path, though, right? Where
the railway.
Yeah. But it was always like locals would do graffiti, a lot of text and imagery. I mean, again, I would see it the first time I didn't see it, and you only see it when you walk back because it was daylight.
It's been a long time. I don't remember that part.
I looked it up tonight because I wanted to make sure my memory was correct, and then all of it's been kind of grayed over because I don't think the path exists. I think that there's some new issue about getting through. It was I was 14 when I snuck out to, I don't think it counts when you sneak out at 4 a.m. to go out, but like to the beach. But I snuck out, and I mean, women have since then become major surfers, even skateboarders. But at the time, there wasn't any women involved. It was really interesting. When I say bystander, I don't even know what that means anymore. But like taking all that in, it's kind of like a distant memory. But I look at Raymond's work, and just even with the baseball and my dad playing almost, high-level baseball, everything feels a little bit like I'm living out somebody else's fantasy. You know what I mean? Like my fantasy is their fantasy. And then there's a lot of mirroring where I don't even think I'm mirroring myself, but I'm mirroring different imago point of views. And I mean, I don't know if Raymond's directly taking in some of his own experiences and then putting it back out, but even image making at some level is being a bystander. I mean, at some level we're witnessing something and then putting it down.
Yeah, well, I think both baseball and surfing both have a strong visual aesthetic to
And
them.
watching the surfers put on and take off their wetsuits in the parking lot.
And there you go. Looms large in the memory.
Oh my God.
Well, I think both. The other thing I think both of you have in common is, I mean, you do both make video, and that's been an important
Yeah.
part of your work, even though it appears maybe more sporadically. And Ray, you return to it from time to time. In terms of like ideas, I mean, we know, Ray, you have a lot of scripts that you still want to accomplish, and a lot of great material still to be produced. Do you think your style of video making would change today as opposed to those ones you were making in the early '80s?
Well, I'm finally getting back to making video. Scripts that go back 20 plus years, a lot of them. And I really haven't been making art to any degree, apart from that in the last year and a half, just because of personal issues. But I can't say how the style is gonna change or not until I do it. I don't work things out with storyboards. I don't spend time on casting or of any sort, and I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, there's always been a sort of like a lot of sort of improvisational elements to them. It seems like in the earlier ones, and for Kaari, I mean, it seems like yours are very precise, I think, in a way. And I'm wondering, like, without knowing.
That makes me so happy. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely, completely. I mean, and obviously the desire, like what you're trying to get across is in many ways very different. But like, what is your process for, do you have scripts and things, like how tightly is that controlled?
So maybe in the future I'll show how that actually comes about, but generally if I have sound piped in or I memorize, I do 3 or 5 versions. So everything is, I do a lot of repetition, doubling, dividing, and rewatching. I've always believed that half of my work is just looking back at it to inform what the work is. So a lot of times I'll make a video just so that I can remake it. So you might be right about the idea that it's highly controlled. I remember the video in Raymond's show. I love that video. And just the 2 nights before, where I said we had this party at my parents' house, was one of the best videos I've ever made, because I haven't seen the footage, so don't hold me to that. But inside, it was one of the best videos because we didn't, I allocated at the bar down on 40th Street what everybody's part was. I gave them a vague subject, and I said, you need to stick to it no matter what. So everything was decided in 30 minutes. Then we just started filming with 2 cameras. I looked at my phone and realized that half of the footage was, of course, lost. Like, it might be one of those situations where I decide to re-videotape, or I deal with the original. Maybe that's just the difference. I think I negate a lot all the way down, actually quite often. So the same with the drawings. Like, I feel like everything I do is erasable. It can be a whole nother image can go on top and completely negate what's underneath it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's only one small scene in any of my videos that was improvised, because this guy seemed to have a natural gift for improvisation, and otherwise everything is word. There's not scripted every word.
Did you write the script?
Oh yeah, I mean, a lot of times directly on cue cards, and
That's great.
there's never. I don't have the means, the production facilities to make them any other way, and so sometimes I'd write as on the spot, but it's actually a compliment, to when people think it is improvised, because I do think I have somewhat of a gift for naturalistic dialogue, if anything, and that's primarily what most of my films are. They're not action pictures or.
Yeah, I mean the rhythms of the dialogue in those videos are so memorable and so precise, and I think that's sort of also what you find in in your drawings even today. Even though let's say sometimes the source material is very specific from literature or elsewhere, but I think there is a kind of a tempo and a syncopation to a lot of your drawings that is what gives them their I think their unique character. I think we always know. Maybe you feel the same, Kaari, that when you read Raymond's writing, even if it it has another source, like somehow it's coming from him.
I love the idea of the cue cards.
Yeah.
That's like the only thing I've never seen anybody use. Like it's so direct. Like you can switch it up in minutes. I never knew that. I mean, I heard it was scripted, and
The actors wear sunglasses, in any circumstance, so they can.
And who would you say was your the best actor that you worked with, given that most of them were not real actors?
I used to love to work with Mike Watt a lot, because I haven't for a while because he's just so busy. I hardly see him, and I don't. It's been a while since I lived in L.A. And
He's very committed. He's really throws him. I mean, even when he performs, he has that.
Yeah, and I've been blessed with so many actors, that I just people I know, who, like I said, I don't go through any casting regimen, for whatever reason.
And Kaari, I mean, you're often your own star.
yeah.
How do you rate your own acting? Do you feel like you're getting better?
That is an awful question, by the way. Yeah. I actually wish I didn't put myself. I constructed this idea, like I set up the structure that I don't do ready-made video, and that even when I videotaped my mom for an hour doing something post a sculpture that was better than the sculpture itself, and I still couldn't utilize the video of my mother because I decided that I'm always my central character, that I always take the subject position. So I recreated it, and that's probably where the whole me becoming my mother came from, this one sculpture. There's such resentment and anger in me filming her post this sculpture that there was no other way, but me becoming her, and I don't even know if I do her justice, so I would think my mom's a much better actress than me. That being said, I came off the tails of this last video and haven't seen the footage. It is, it might exhaust itself because I do think that there's a point that I'm getting better at it. I like how uncomfortable my early video was. I hate, it might not seem like it, but I really do hate being on video. It's very hard because I set up my own camera a lot of times. Only until recently, I don't run my own camera. And so if I fuck up all the tech equipment, everything's lost. I used to have this studio in North Hollywood where the airplanes would go over and I'd have to get in prosthetics, prosthetic vagina, prosthetic boobs, hair, makeup, dirty, grotto, start filming something that supposedly means something. I don't know if it's me. I don't know if it's supposed to be the character. How do I become the character? And it was just this lonely event. I think that work upon reflection might be better than the work now where I have help, where we have fun, where I don't have to make sure that the tape, I actually still use cassette, is downloaded correctly. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, it's a
I
very
can't
different,
predict it.
Yeah, and I think, also, Ray, for you, for your videos, I mean, that's a different process than when you're in the studio and making drawings. One other thing I thought about in the two of you, with both of your shows, Kaari, your work obviously has a strong autobiographical component, and obviously your mom's a big part of that. And I think, Ray, a lot of people with your show don't always know that there is so much autobiography, and there was parts of that show that were dedicated to your mom and your aunt. How much did your mom play a role in drawing and writing? I think we talk about your dad's relationship to literature a lot, but what role did your mom play for you in terms of encouraging the direction of what your work became?
Well, for a long time, she was really my only audience. I mean, I wasn't any overnight success. And my father was a writer and a teacher of English, and but I can't say he was a influence on me at all, really. He was I've just been rereading some of his works. He was an excellent writer, but in his own specific field, and we never had the kind of relationship that would of an encouragement or influence upon art in any way.
I think maybe, Kaari, did you have a question for Ray by any chance that you wanted to ask? Since we have
I mean, I guess we're kind of abstractly covering the idea of text. I never used text until I graduated Cal Arts, and I painted, but I never put text into it. But I think we're kind of abstractly covering why we use text in the work. I was never really sure. I use a lot of other people's words. Then the drawing is so big that I have to flip it upside down in order to work at the top half upside down, and then I tend to use the research material, which can be anything from theory to anybody's words, and then I generally reflect upon it on the top, but I flip it upside down to like work more intuitively back, like a conversation. But the one thing I wanted to ask Raymond, I think, was out of all of the mediums I work in, sculpture, I don't think I do installation work for whatever reason. Like I don't think about things in terms of installation necessarily, but I guess I do video, sculpture, whatever else, performance. Is that in drawing I can work drunk, and I've thought about this a few times, very seriously, because I've woken up some mornings where I was like, I did that, and it's a kind of a hard place to land, but I can't get to certain spots without it, and it's like I describe it when I flip the drawing upside down. And I always wondered, like, if it was like my deeper self that was working on it, another self, like, or I don't really understand why sometimes the component of being slightly subconscious and not on a conscious level can produce work. And I'm curious if you're ever in that zone.
No.
Shit.
I don't drink much anymore. One thing, so I'm sure some of my drawings were done under the influence of
I don't
of
necessarily
alcohol,
think
but
it's alcohol. I'm saying that, like,
I wouldn't recommend alcohol. I mean, coffee.
it's true.
I haven't done speed in many years, or Adderall, but those and I don't recommend anything. I mean, I can't fuck with my heart condition or anything in any way, but they do speed up the synapses of the brain, in ways that can help the kind of associative nature of my writing, and I mean, I've been asked many times, like, where do you get your ideas, or LSD or whatever, it must be acid, or, I've done that a handful of times in my life, very weak versions of it that were of no useful purpose for making art. And my art is pretty sober-minded.
Yeah, I think that's also what the show, for what a revelation for me who's been looking at the drawing so long, was to actually that you were willing to reveal that process and how constructed those drawings really are. How much time and research and history goes into those things. I think is a very part of what makes them special, but I think also something that maybe isn't necessarily
it's not it's like recently too, I started doing kind of more athletic events with people, and I thought it was really, well, being out in San Bernardino in the desert under the sun painting this one tree over and over makes your mind open up. It's not necessarily about like getting drunk, or it's just like being outside. I think meditation can do it too, but it's been something that's come up a lot for me with other practices. I can't do anything that is mind altering. I don't think meditation hurts anybody, but it is funny how much informs like the framework of drawing for me, and fluid text and such, where it seems to come, maybe it's deep inside, but somehow there's an activity out then back in that seems to register. I don't know. I have this romantic idea that there was like this ability to go surfing and like see the ocean from that back in, and then like go in and make work. Or I've always felt a little bit on the fringe in terms of like I have access to only so many things, that I am surprised when sometimes I make something that seems to come from somewhere else. I don't know how to describe it. It only really happens with me with drawing.
Well, if I could, you know, throw a baseball 95 plus like your father, I probably would be playing baseball, you know?
Yeah.
And if I could surf as well as, you know, some others, I'd probably be out on the beach, you know, more often.
Well, we're very lucky that both of you choose to draw very well. So thank you guys very much. We're out of time, but yeah.